it is twisted, it twists back, which is why physical therapy can be helpful. When the body is lacking something, it tries to compensate. It would prefer to fill the void with what is lacking, but if that's not available, it will use a substitute, either a physical alternative or a symbolic alternative. This is why the body may draw calcium from one bone to try and assist another bone, why people get cravings for things like dirt and paint, and why people who crave love may eat too much. If the body, or a part of it, seems to be in danger of imminent injury, the body will attempt to withdraw from the danger if it can, or at least surround the endangered part with a protective coating or buffer zone. That's why we get calluses and blisters, or excess fat and muscle tension. Conversely, if something seems to be attacking the body from the inside, the body will send agents to attack it back. That's why you have white blood cells and antibodies. Regardless of whether the source of a stress is an injury or a virus, the actual symptoms known as illness are produced by the body itself. Even though illness may be a distorted reaction to stress, it is still the body's best effort to cope based on what's possible at the moment. Therefore, one can say that all illness is an attempt on the part of the body to solve a problem related to stress. Healing is the effort to help the body do a better job of solving the problem. The mind is an intangible entity. Of course, you know it's there because you can experience its effects, but you can't hold it or smell it or see it. For some behavioral scientists, the phenomenon of the mind is produced by physical processes within the body. Their idea of the mind-body effect is not that the mind and body interact, but that the mind is an effect of the body. However, if that's true, then what they say is only an effect of physical processes and you don't have to pay any attention to it. It might be more useful to think about the mind in terms of a metaphor and say it is like the ocean, with a lot of layers, a lot of currents, a lot of hidden places, a lot of open places, and host to a lot of useful and very weird stuff. Many people have tried to determine what the essential characteristic of the mind is, and so have I. I believe that the essential characteristic of the mind is imagination. All of the talents associated with the mind, such as analysis, synthesis, reasoning, determination, decision-making, and creativity, derive from its ability to imagine. The mind can imagine what was, what is, and what will be. Even more wonderfully, it can imagine what wasn't, what isn't, and what never will be. And on occasion, it has a hard time telling the difference. Everything that the body can experience, the mind can imagine, and then some. It's as if the mind uses memory as a springboard to create brand new experiences, first as a thought, then as a fantasy, then as a plan, then as directed activity, using imagination from beginning to end. As a matter of fact, the so-called third eye that is discussed in many spiritual teachings is really the eye of the imagination, the mind's eye. It is not the pineal gland, although that organ may play an important role in the imaginative process. Traditionally, the third eye is located in the center of the forehead, the area of the frontal lobes of the brain, while the pineal gland is located straight back in from the tip of your nose. Interestingly, damage to or destruction of the frontal lobes, as by the ill-famed process called lobotomy, seems to have the effect of inhibiting or eliminating the faculty of imagination. Another example of the body affecting the mind as much as the mind affects the body. Like the body, the mind is motivated toward pleasure and away from pain. However, pleasure and pain for the mind are not directly connected to sensations. As far as the mind is concerned, pleasure consists in rightness, and pain consists in wrongness. These two qualities do not seem to be absolute. Every human society has different criteria for rightness and wrongness, and every human being in a society has his or her own peculiar variations on the criteria. On the whole, however, rightness is associated with conformity, effectiveness, meaningfulness, importance, and knowledge. Wrongness is associated with nonconformity, ineffectiveness, meaninglessness, unimportance, and ignorance. The mind is very clever, though. Nonconformity in one person can be conformity to an ideal or a purpose in another person. Ineffectiveness in one person's view can be effectiveness in the view of another. Meaninglessness can be meaningful to someone who writes about it. Unimportant can be important as a distraction from stress. And ignorance, on occasion, is bliss. There are those who think that the highest form of mental activity is reasoning, or so-called rational thought. This is because they don't understand what the use of reason really is. Reasoning has to do with explaining or making logical sense out of something, and rational simply refers to the use of reasoning. But first there has to be an assumption on which to base the explanation or the logic. This means you have to make up or imagine an opinion about something and call it true, which turns it into a belief. Or you can borrow someone else's opinions and call them true, which turns their opinions into your beliefs. When you no longer question a belief, it's called a fact. There are relatively few facts in the world, in the sense of experiences that are common to everyone, and that are not just interpretations of experience. Gravity is a fact, but explanations of gravity are just opinions. Pain is a fact, but ideas about what causes it are opinions. Illness is a fact, but causes and cures come from the realm of beliefs, which are unquestioned opinions. And even actual facts are subject to beliefs. There isn't a single fact that you could name that someone else would not sincerely contradict. And that's a fact. Now, when the mind comes up with an opinion and turns it into a belief by deciding not to question it, the body remembers it and stores it as a rule that governs any related behavior. If your mother told you that you would catch a cold if you got your feet wet with your shoes on, and you accepted that as a fact, your body would adopt that as a rule and make sure that you would get cold symptoms whenever you got your feet wet with your shoes on. If you decide that you won't catch a cold if you get your feet wet while wearing certain kinds of shoes, such as reef walkers, and if you turn that into a belief by not questioning that decision, then your body will revise its remembered rule so that you can splash around on the reefs without getting a cold. Beliefs created, that is imagined by the mind, can even override genetic beliefs inherited by the body, which is what happens in the case of so many so-called miraculous cures. The mind and the body work together all the time. Actually, it would be more accurate to say that they interact all the time, because some of their behavior could not be called togetherness. When the mind thinks a thought, the body responds. Every thought sets off neurochemical activity that corresponds to the nature of the thought. Here's a simple experiment. Take a moment and imagine you are a beggar in medieval London. You have no money, so you dip your bowl in an open sewer and take a drink. Go ahead. Smell it. Taste it. Okay, that's enough. I don't want you to gag. You probably didn't go through with it anyway. But even the thought of doing it would have initiated neurological, chemical, and even muscular activity in your body. If you did go through with it, you may have tasted foul stuff in your mouth, experienced your body growing heavy or contracted, and felt unhappy. Now imagine yourself as the king or queen of Atlantis, sitting on your throne of gold and velvet, while the ambassador of Lemuria presents you with a box made of amber and filled with rubies, diamonds, and emeralds. Hold the box. Feel the jewels, while all the court applauds your wise diplomacy. Now stop. Whether you were thrilled, amused, or bored with this little story, it will still have induced physical changes in your body. You may have felt the sensation of the jewels, experienced pleasure, a sense of lightness and expansion, or other very physical effects. If you imagine you're going to get sick, your body will scour its memory and begin to produce the physical reactions and substances to generate the appropriate symptoms. And if you imagine yourself getting well, the body will start the healing process. The link between the mind and the body is emotion. Emotions are waves of energy that carry messages. When the mind communicates with the body, the latter reacts according to the degree of emotion stimulated by the thought, while it carries elements of the thought along with it, similar to the way radio waves carry information. When the body communicates with the mind, it uses memory to get the same effect. Emotions exist only as they are felt. They are not stored any more than the waves of the ocean are. When you think a joyful thought, or when an experience triggers a joyful memory, the body generates a joyful emotion. When you think an anxious thought, or an experience triggers an anxious memory, the body generates an anxious emotion. The emotion occurs right there in the moment. When the stimulus of thought or experience is gone, then so is the emotion. Emotions are not stored. Emotions are not suppressed. You do not walk around like a warehouse of old emotions. You do not breathe yesterday's air or surf yesterday's wave. Well, if you aren't carrying suppressed emotions, why do emotions based on old events break out so strongly in a crisis? The answer has to do with a combination of stimulus response and tension energy. Tension is the body's way of suppressing the ideas it learned from the mind that would, if acknowledged, generate an unpleasant emotion. On its own, the body just expresses emotions as they come up, regardless of the consequences. But if the mind creates a belief that certain kinds of emotions are not to be expressed, or certain ideas or memories are not to be acknowledged because that would be painful or dangerous, then the body will suppress them in the only way it can, which is by tensing muscles so that they can't move. If the cells can't move, the memories will not transmit, and emotions won't exist. Think of this as setting up a barrier so the waves can't form in the first place, or as a mountain that blocks the north wind and leaves the southern ocean nice and calm. But mountains erode under the pressure of constant wind, and the body erodes under the pressure of constant tension. When the stimulus of additional related ideas or experience becomes so strong that the body cannot produce enough additional tension to suppress a reaction, or when the amount of tension present is so great it cannot be held anymore, then the result is an outburst of emotion amplified by the release of tension energy. Emotions are the means by which the mind and body communicate with each other. When the mind experiences pleasure or pain, there is an emotional response in the body. When the body experiences pleasure or pain, there's an emotional response in the mind. Every thought produces a disturbance or excitement in the body's physiology. Thoughts that don't relate to important issues of pain or pleasure cause little disturbance or excitement, and little in the way of behavioral change. The dates of the terms of office of U.S. presidents usually go in one ear and out the other, unless a test grade is involved, and the moment that the test is over, they usually disappear. Thoughts that relate directly to mental or physical pain or pleasure may cause great disturbance or excitement, depending on the degree of potential pain or pleasure involved. Thoughts of a burglar being in the house, or of picking up a grand prize that has been won, may cause massive energetic and behavioral changes. Likewise, every physiological change, however stimulated, produces a disturbance or excitement in the mind's thinking process. Accordingly, physiological changes that are not related to the mental pain or pleasure of most people may have no noticeable effect on the mind. On the other hand, behavior experienced or perceived that challenges or strongly reinforces cherished assumptions and rules of the mind may cause massive thinking activity. To summarize, you can use the mind to bring pleasure or pain to the body, and you can use the body to bring pleasure or pain to the mind. This also means that you can use either to help in healing the other. The rest of this program is about doing just that. Now I'm going to give you specific ideas and techniques to heal yourself using the power of words, the power of imagination, the power of touch, and the power of energy. Let's begin with words. Specifically, a magical word. Abracadabra is probably the most well-known magical word in the world. If you enjoy fairy tales, if you read sword and sorcery novels, or if you like movies and television series with magicians and wizards, you know how important magical words are. They are the major component of magical spells. After all, anyone can gather a few newt's eyes and lizard tongues, but if you don't know the right words to say, you're nowhere. Imagine a powerful magician with a pointy little beard wearing a black cloak with red lining. He raises his arms, lightning flashes from his fingers, and he says in a commanding voice, "Do what I want." Not too exciting. But if he says, "Alakazam," wow, impressive. Mystery grants authority. If someone speaks gobbledygook with confidence, people who don't know that it's gobbledygook will be impressed. A friend once gave me a tape recording of a man speaking on some esoteric subject. My friend thought I should listen to it because it was extremely good. Now, my vocabulary is fairly extensive, and I studied logic in college. The man on the tape was a strong, confident speaker, but what he said was nonsense. It wasn't that I didn't agree with him. There was nothing to agree or disagree with. Most of what he said was rampant, inconsistent nonsense, and he randomly threw in big words for their sound and not their meaning. As gently as possible, I analyzed this man's talk for my friend, and he was amazed that he had been so gullible. If words are said in a certain way, or in a certain context, that can also give them more authority than their actual meaning would warrant. The words of a prayer or a political speech, or those of a doctor or a hypnotist, may have an impact far beyond their meaning because of when and how and by whom they are spoken. Fundamentally, words are sounds or arbitrary marks to which you give meaning. Languages are organizations of sounds and marks used by particular groups of people. That's all there is to it. Any power that words have is given to them by you. The more power you give them, the greater their effect on you. But the power comes from you and not the words. Speak the most powerful magical incantation in ancient Hebrew to a 12-year-old Chinese schoolboy, and you'll get puzzlement, not awe. And you won't be able to turn him into a frog either. With that said, words are still an incredibly useful tool for healing. The most powerful use they have, as long as you understand their meaning and or give them authority, is to help you direct your attention, to assist you in sharpening and sustaining your focus. The more clearly and consistently you can focus your attention on a healing thought or intent, the more quickly and thoroughly the body will respond in a healing way. Now let's see how to use ordinary words to get magical effects. Healing by interpretation. Once when I was teaching a class, a regular member of the group arrived late, quite breathless and very agitated. After a few moments she calmed down, just enough to tell us of a near accident she'd had on the way to class. In considerable detail she described how a car had come out of a side street and had almost run right into her. If she hadn't slammed on the brakes as soon as she had, she would have been killed instantly. On and on she went about how she had almost been killed, and she was in a state of great fear and stress. Suddenly I interrupted and said, "But you're here and alive, aren't you?" "What?" she said, with a startled look. I repeated my statement with an added touch. I said, "You survived. You're here with us now, and that's wonderful, isn't it?" After a momentary confusion, her body relaxed, she smiled and looked around and said, "You're right." And she was happy for the rest of the evening. The woman had been locked into an interpretation of the event as a near-death experience. The words she used kept reinforcing that interpretation, and the resulting focus maintained and even exaggerated her fear and stress. Instead of a tranquilizer, however, all she needed was a shift of focus. A few words based on observable experience led her away from imagined pain and injury to the experiential reality of being alive and well. Her emotional trauma was healed in less than a minute. Reinterpreting experience is one of the most powerful healing methods there is. It can heal emotional wounds as well as physical ones, and it's all based on a choice of words. I'll describe some variations in more detail. The positive twist. The positive twist is the simplest variation. It's what I used with the woman I just mentioned. All you do is look for the good in the past event or the present result and make that the center of attention. You don't try to deny any negative experience, you just make the positive aspect more important. To the degree that you can do this, you will relieve a lot of stress that may have accumulated from dwelling on the negative side of whatever happened. The more quickly that stress can be relieved, the more quickly a healing will result. Even physical symptoms caused by such stress can disappear with amazing speed. The skinny description. Very often, the negative effects of negative events are sustained and aggravated by repeatedly using loaded words in describing the events.